Commander Finn Zaylor was a man of simple tastes. He didn't want to be a hero. He didn't want glory. His job as a human officer for the Galactic Coalition was clear: maintain peace, resolve disputes, and get the job done. He'd been through countless missions, from settling territorial disputes to managing political unrest, but nothing could have prepared him for the encounter on Celeris 9, the most mysterious and dangerous planet in the galaxy. It was here that everything would change. Solaris 9 had always been a place of wonder and fear, a planet where ancient civilizations had risen and fallen. Its ruler, Empress Leora, was as enigmatic as the world she governed. Known for her unmatched intelligence and breathtaking beauty, she was a figure that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Many whispered that she possessed powers that no one truly understood, powers that seemed to defy the laws of nature itself. The rumors surrounding her were endless, but Finn had no interest in the gossip. He had been sent to negotiate a peace treaty between two warring factions, nothing more. The day he arrived, the planet's capital city felt like something out of a dream. Towering spires stretched into the sky, glowing with a strange, ethereal light. The streets were lined with beings from all corners of the galaxy, each with their own stories, but all brought together by the rule of Empress Leora. Finn was escorted through the palace, a sprawling structure of gold and glass, its halls filled with the quiet hum of advanced technology. His mission was simple: convince Leora to accept a truce that could end the war that had plagued Solaris 9 for centuries. As he stepped into the grand dining hall, Finn couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. The Empress had invited him to dinner, a gesture of goodwill, but there was something more to it, something he couldn't quite place. Leora sat at the head of the long, ornate table, her gaze fixed on him. She was every bit as beautiful as the stories had described, with piercing silver eyes that seemed to look right through him. Her long dark hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her skin shimmered with a light that didn't come from any artificial source. She radiated an aura of power, yet there was something oddly vulnerable about her as well. Finn took his seat across from her, his mind racing as the dinner began. It was a lavish meal, with dishes from all over the galaxy, each one more exotic than the last. But Finn barely tasted the food. His thoughts were consumed with the delicate balance of power in the room. He knew he had to keep his wits about him. One wrong move, one poorly chosen word, and his entire mission could be ruined. They exchanged pleasantries, and for a time it felt like any other diplomatic dinner. But then, something changed. Without warning, Empress Leora collapsed forward, her body going limp in her chair. A gasp echoed around the room as the attendants rushed to her side, but Finn was already on his feet. Without thinking, he stepped forward and knelt beside her. He had been trained for many situations, but this was different. His hands shook as he gently pressed his fingers to Leora's wrist, checking for a pulse. The room went still. It was as if time itself had stopped. Finn's mind raced as he tried to assess the situation, but everything seemed to blur around him. He couldn't explain it, but there was a strange energy in the air, a pulse, almost electric, that seemed to radiate from Leora's body the moment his fingers made contact with her skin. It was not just the pulse of a human being, but something more, ancient. The strange energy around them intensified, and Finn could feel his heart racing. It was as though the room itself was frozen in time, the very air thick with an unspoken tension. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the sensation faded. Finn pulled his hand away, and as if waking from a deep sleep, Leora's eyes snapped open. For a moment they simply stared at each other, the world outside their little bubble feeling distant and far away. The silence between them was deafening. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Leora spoke. You've just proposed marriage to me, she said, her tone unwavering. Finn blinked in confusion. He looked around the room, searching for some explanation, but the others were as stunned as he was. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. A proposal? He had checked her pulse, not proposed marriage. Was she joking? But the look in her eyes told him she was not. "Excuse me?" Finn stammered, unsure of how to respond. Leora's expression didn't change. "You touched my wrist, and in doing so, you activated the bond that had been prophesied. You are now bound to me. We are bound by fate." The room remained deathly silent. Finn's mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake. He had only checked her pulse, for crying out loud. But Leora wasn't listening to his protests. She stood slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "We are bound," she repeated, her voice firm. "There is no turning back." Finn stood up, a mix of confusion and panic setting in. He took a step back, trying to process what had just occurred. His mission had just gone from simple diplomacy to something far more complex, something that involved not just politics, but something mystical. As Leora's attendants moved forward to help her rise, Finn remained frozen in place. His heart raced. There had to be some explanation for this, some way to undo what had just happened. But as Leora regained her composure, she met his gaze again. There was no hint of humor, no sign of trickery. She was serious. "You should not have touched me," she said softly. "But now that you have, there are consequences. Not just for you, but for everyone." Finn's mind was spinning. He had just touched the wrist of an alien Empress, one with the power to manipulate time itself. And somehow, by doing so, he had proposed marriage. The weight of her words was starting to settle in. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something had happened, something profound, and he had no idea what to do about it.
The dinner continued, but the tension in the room was palpable.
Finn could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on him, but he couldn't focus on anything except Leora. Her beauty, her power, the strange energy that had surrounded them. It all felt like a dream, but he knew it wasn't. This was real. The rest of the evening was a blur. Finn's mind was preoccupied with the impossible situation he now found himself in. How had he gone from a simple officer on a peace mission to a man tangled in the fate of an alien empress? And what did this bond mean for him, for her, and for the galaxy at large? As he made his way back to his quarters that night, Finn tried to rationalize everything that had happened. But the more he thought about it, the more questions arose. What was the bond between him and Leora? And why had the Empress reacted the way she had? She had spoken of prophecy and fate, but what did it all mean? The night was long, and sleep did not come easy. The weight of the Empress's words echoed in his mind, and the strange energy from their brief touch lingered in the back of his thoughts. Finn couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just been irrevocably altered in ways he could not yet understand. And, as the stars of Solaris, 9 glittered in the night sky, Finn Zaylor knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, he would never be the same again. The following days felt like a blur for Finn Zaylor. His mind constantly raced, unable to settle on any single thought. Ever since the strange event in the dining hall, he had been pulled into a web of confusion, politics, and emotions. It seemed impossible that a simple touch, a quick check of the Empress's pulse, could have caused such a dramatic shift in his life. But there was no denying the reality of what had happened. He had proposed to Empress Leora, whether by mistake or fate, and now they were bound together, as she had claimed. The palace, once a majestic sight of shining towers and vast halls, now felt oppressive, every corner filled with whispers, questioning glances, and hidden meanings. Finn tried to keep his composure, but it wasn't easy. He was, after all, a soldier, not a prince, and certainly not someone prepared to navigate the complicated politics of an alien kingdom. The tension between the factions on Solaris, 9 had already been at a boiling point. But now, It had reached a breaking point. The news of Finn's so-called proposal spread like wildfire, and soon there were rumors that had taken on a life of their own. Some believed that Finn's touch was a sign of the Empress's downfall, while others saw it as a sign of a new, more powerful alliance. And then, there were those who believed that Finn was part of an elaborate plot to control the Empress's powers for personal gain. All these rumors swirled in the palace, threatening to unravel everything. But what made the situation even more dangerous was the rising threat from General Varrock, one of the most powerful military leaders on the planet. Varrock had long been a rival to the Empress's rule, seeking to take control of Solaris 9 for himself. His faction had grown bolder in recent months, and now, with the confusion surrounding the proposed bond between Finn and Leora, Varrock saw an opportunity to strike. Finn was summoned to the throne room, his heart heavy with the weight of his new reality. He had hoped for some explanation, some way to understand why he had become entangled in the Empress's fate. But what he found when he entered the throne room only made things more complicated. Leora stood at the center of the room, her back straight and her gaze unwavering. She looked every bit the ruler she was, commanding, powerful, and distant. But Finn could sense the tension in her posture, the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly, betraying the calm she tried to project. She was just as uncertain about what had happened as he was. "You wanted to speak with me?" Finn asked, stepping forward cautiously. His voice was steady, but the uncertainty in his chest gnawed at him. Leora turned her head slowly, her silver eyes locking onto his. "Yes, Commander," she said, her voice calm, but with a hint of something deeper.
I need your help, and I need you to understand that this
bond between us, whether we like it or not, cannot be ignored. Finn swallowed hard. He had never been one to shy away from challenges, but this was something entirely different. He wasn't just navigating a dangerous political situation anymore. He was in the heart of it, caught in the middle of a prophecy that seemed to have chosen him without his consent. And now, it seemed, his help was needed more than ever. "I don't understand," Finn admitted, his voice soft.
What do you mean by this bond? What does it mean for me, for you, for Solaris 9?
Leora's eyes softened for a moment, and she took a step closer to him, her presence almost overwhelming.
I will explain, but you must listen carefully.
The bond between us is not something I chose. It is something that has been set into motion for centuries, something my ancestors foresaw. It is not just a marriage. It is the joining of two powers, one human and one alien. The prophecy says that the one who touches the Empress, who awakens this bond, will be the key to saving the kingdom, or destroying it. Finn's mind raced as Leora continued. "My power is tied to the planet itself, and to the people I rule. But it is a power that is both a blessing and a curse. I can control time, bend it to my will, but at great cost. I cannot use this power without a balance, without a counterforce, and that force is you, Finn."
The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Finn could hardly believe what he was hearing.
How could he, an ordinary human soldier, be the key to such unimaginable power? What had he gotten himself into? "Why me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm no one special."
Leora shook her head slowly. "You don't understand."
The prophecy does not require someone special. It requires a human who can balance my power, someone who can ground it, make it stable. That is why you were chosen, whether you like it or not. Finn felt a weight settle on his shoulders. He had always known that he would face dangers as a soldier, but this was something beyond any battlefield he had ever imagined. The fate of an entire planet rested in his hands. And the worst part was, he didn't know how to make sense of it all. How could he help Leora, let alone save Solaris? 9 when he didn't even understand the full extent of the power they were dealing with. Before he could ask another question, the door to the throne room burst open, and a group of soldiers entered, their faces tense and full of urgency. One of them, a tall man with short-cropped hair and a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward and saluted Leora.
"Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm. "General Varrock's forces are advancing."
"He's ready to strike." Leora's expression hardened, and she turned back to Finn. This is the moment we feared. Varrock has learned of the bond, and he believes it is his chance to seize control. He won't stop until he has you, Finn, and the power you hold.
Finn's heart raced.
The room seemed to close in around him. He had come to Solaris 9 to negotiate peace, not to become a pawn in a galactic power struggle. But now, with Varrock's forces closing in and the fate of the kingdom resting on his shoulders, there was no turning back.
"What can I do?"
Finn asked, his voice barely a whisper.
"How do I stop him?"
Leora stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "You will stay by my side. Together, we will stand against Varrock."
"Your role in this bond will be tested."
The power you hold, the connection between us, is not just something we can ignore. It is the only thing that can save Solaris 9. Finn nodded, though his heart was heavy with uncertainty. He had no idea how he could help, but he wasn't going to stand by and let the planet fall into chaos. The soldiers gathered around, preparing for the battle that would determine the fate of the kingdom. Finn's mind was still spinning with everything Leora had said, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back down now. He was in this, whether he liked it or not. And if there was any chance of saving Solaris 9, he had to stand with Leora, even if he had no idea what that would mean for the future. The palace was soon a flurry of activity as soldiers and advisors scrambled to prepare for the coming war. Finn found himself standing beside Leora, his hand hovering over the weapon at his side. He had fought in countless battles before, but none like this. None where the stakes were so high, none where the outcome seemed so uncertain. As they made their way to the palace's war room, Finn couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. He had come to Solaris 9 hoping for a peaceful resolution, but now he was part of something much larger. He was part of a prophecy, part of a power struggle that could either save or destroy everything he had ever known. And in that moment, as he stood beside the Empress, the weight of destiny pressed down on him, and he knew that there was no turning back. The air in the war room was thick with tension. Finn Zaylor stood in front of the massive table, his gaze fixed on the holographic display of Solaris 9's military positions. Around him, the commanders and advisors of the Empress whispered in urgent tones, their words blending together in a blur of fear and confusion. Finn could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. This was no longer just a mission. It was a battle for the future of an entire kingdom. The dark truth was impossible to ignore. General Varrock, the ambitious leader of the rival faction, had gathered his forces and was closing in on the capital. His goal was clear: take control of the planet, seize Leora, and use her powers for his own gain. The kingdom was on the brink of collapse, and with it, the prophecy that had bound Finn to the Empress seemed more real than ever. Leora stood beside him, her posture regal, but her expression was distant. Finn had grown used to seeing her with a calm and composed demeanor, but now the cracks in her facade were showing. He could feel the strain in her every movement, the weight of her powers pressing down on her. She was a ruler, but she was also a prisoner of fate, bound by an ancient prophecy she hadn't chosen. "Commander," Leora's voice was steady, but there was a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. "I don't know if I can win this battle without you." Finn turned to face her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You have the power to control time itself." "What do you mean you can't win without me?" Leora met his gaze, her silver eyes filled with a deep, unspoken truth. You are not just a soldier, Finn. You are part of the balance I need to control my powers. Without you, I will lose everything. I will lose my kingdom and my people. Finn's chest tightened as her words sank in. This was no longer about diplomacy. It was about survival. He had known for some time that his role in this prophecy was crucial, but hearing it from Leora herself made it all the more real. His heart raced, and a new weight settled on his shoulders. It wasn't just his life at stake. It was the life of an entire planet. As the room filled with a buzz of activity, Finn felt a deep sense of helplessness. He wasn't a ruler, he wasn't a leader, and he wasn't ready for the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. He had always followed orders, always done his duty. But this was different. This was about the future. His future, and Leora's. And yet, despite the weight of it all, a small voice in the back of his mind reminded him that he had a choice. He could walk away. He could leave the palace, board a ship, and return to the safety of the coalition. It would be easy, but something inside him, a force he couldn't ignore, kept him rooted to the spot. The choice was his to make, and it was a choice he couldn't ignore. Leora seemed to read his thoughts. She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. Finn, I can't ask this of you, but I need you to decide. The battle is coming, and we have only one chance. If we fail, Solaris, 9 will fall. But if you choose to stand by my side, we may just have a chance. Finn looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the prophecy had been revealed. She was not just the Empress. She was a person who had been forced into this role, a person who carried the burden of her people's hopes and fears. And now she was looking to him for help, for strength, for something she couldn't do alone. His heart pounded in his chest. How had he gotten here? How had a simple soldier become part of something so far beyond his understanding? And yet, deep down, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not now.
I'll stay, Finn said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. I'll fight with you. Leora's eyes softened, and for a moment, the fierce, powerful Empress disappeared, replaced by someone who was just as vulnerable as he felt.
Thank you, Finn. I don't know what the future holds, but with you by my side, I believe we have a chance. As the words left her mouth, the door to the war room opened, and a messenger entered, breathless with urgency. Your Majesty, General Varrock's forces are approaching the city's outer defenses. They will reach the palace within hours. Leora's face hardened again, the ruler taking control once more. She turned to the table, her fingers dancing over the holographic display. We must prepare. All units must be mobilized immediately. Finn followed her lead, stepping forward to join the commanders at the table. He had no time to waste on doubt. It was clear that the moment of truth had arrived, and there was no room for hesitation. The fate of Solaris, 9 of Leora, and of himself hung in the balance. The next few hours were a blur of preparation and strategy. The palace was a flurry of activity as soldiers and advisors scrambled to defend the capital. Finn found himself working alongside Leora's top generals, planning the defense and organizing the palace's security. It was strange to be in such a pivotal position. Just days ago, he had been a simple officer, following orders. Now he was an integral part of the plan to save a kingdom. Leora moved with a sense of purpose, her mind constantly calculating, adjusting and readjusting their strategies. Finn watched her, awestruck by her strength, but also by the burden she carried. She was the Empress, but she was still a person who had made sacrifices and who now had to make the hardest decision of all. As night fell, the atmosphere in the palace grew heavier. The sky outside was dark, and the distant sounds of war could be heard echoing through the city. The time for talking was over. Now, they had to act. Finn stood in front of the palace's grand balcony, looking out over the city. He could see the first signs of the enemy's advance, the distant glow of weapons firing, the ominous hum of battle machines as they powered up for war. The city was alive with the threat of destruction. Leora joined him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the horizon, knowing that the battle would soon come to their doorstep. "It's not too late to turn back," Finn said quietly, his voice betraying the doubts that still lingered in his mind. "We could escape. We could leave the planet and let them fight it out." Leora turned to him, her silver eyes filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "No," she said firmly. "I won't run. Not when my people are depending on me."
This is my kingdom, Finn, and I won't let it fall into the hands of someone like Varrock.
Finn nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had made his choice. There was no turning back. And as much as he feared what was to come, he knew he couldn't abandon Leora.
"Not now! We fight together," he said, his voice steady.
"We fight together," Leora echoed, her eyes meeting his. The palace seemed to hold its breath as the final preparations were made. The soldiers stood in formation, ready for battle. Finn stood by Leora's side, ready to face whatever came next. His heart pounded, but he no longer felt the weight of uncertainty. He had made his choice, and now all he could do was face the coming storm. The distant sounds of battle grew louder, and the first wave of Varrock's forces began to march toward the capital. The fate of Solaris. 9 rested on their shoulders. It was a battle they couldn't afford to lose. As the sun set on the horizon, Finn and Leora stood side by side, their hearts beating in unison. The choice had been made. There was no turning back, and together they would face the storm. The dawn came with an eerie quietness over the capital of Solaris. Finn Zaylor stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out at the vast city below. The streets, usually alive with the hustle and bustle of daily life, were now still. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for the battle that was about to unfold. The distant hum of war machines and the flashes of energy in the sky told him that the enemy was close and the final confrontation was inevitable. The night had been long, filled with preparations and the steady tension that had grown since General Varrock's forces had begun their march toward the palace. The kingdom of Solaris. 9 was on the edge of destruction, and every moment brought them closer to the point of no return. Finn had never imagined himself in such a position, standing alongside an alien Empress, facing a threat that could shatter everything. As the light of day began to break through the clouds, Leora joined him on the balcony. She moved with a calm grace that seemed to defy the weight of the moment. Her silver eyes, usually so unreadable, now seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 decisions, each one leading her to this final point. She stood beside him for a moment, both of them looking out over the city, knowing that the battle ahead would decide their fates. "Do you regret it?" Leora's voice broke the silence, soft and quiet. Finn glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "Regret what?" "The choice," she said, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "Choosing to stay." "Choosing to fight with me!" Finn took a deep breath. The answer came easily now, though it hadn't always been so clear. "No, I don't regret it." Leora turned to him then, her eyes meeting his, searching for something, a hint of uncertainty perhaps. "This isn't what you signed up for. I know that. You came here to help me with diplomacy, to broker peace, and now we're about to go to war. I didn't want this for you." "You didn't ask for any of this." Finn shook his head, the weight of his decision settling in his chest. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady. "I didn't ask for this. But it doesn't matter now. I'm here, and I'm staying. Whatever happens, I'll be by your side." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause before Leora spoke again, Her voice, though calm, held a trace of something deeper, something vulnerable.
I'm afraid of what will happen if we fail.
Finn stepped closer, his gaze unwavering.
We won't fail.
Not while we stand together. Leora gave a small, bittersweet smile, then turned back to the city, her expression hardening once more. We have no choice but to fight. Varrock won't stop until he has everything. The power he seeks, it's not just the throne.
He wants me. He wants the power that flows through my blood, the power to control time itself.
The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Finn could feel it. The power she wielded, the responsibility she carried, it was beyond anything he had ever imagined. But as much as Leora's abilities frightened him, it was clear that they were their only hope now. Without her, the planet would fall, and without Finn, she would be alone in the fight. They both knew that the coming battle was not just about survival. It was about the future of Solaris.
9. About whether the kingdom would fall into the hands of a power-hungry tyrant or remain free.
But even more than that, it was about something neither of them could control. The prophecy that had bound them together in a way neither could have predicted. Finn was no longer just a soldier. He was part of something much larger, something that had been set in motion long before he ever stepped foot on this planet. The palace had been transformed into a fortress. Soldiers lined the halls prepared for the coming assault. The air was thick with the sounds of war preparations, footsteps echoing through the corridors, weapons being checked, commands being issued. Finn found himself standing alongside the palace's generals once more, now more than ever a crucial part of the plan. Leora was everywhere, giving orders, rallying her people, maintaining her composure despite the overwhelming pressure. She was the Empress, and in that moment, she embodied the weight of the entire kingdom. Finn had never seen her more powerful, more determined, and yet there was something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, that told him that she, too, was afraid. The battle began as the sun began to set. The distant rumble of approaching forces grew louder, and the ground seemed to shake beneath their feet. Finn stood at the front of the palace with Leora, surrounded by soldiers. The air was charged with anticipation, the tension thick enough to cut through. There was no turning back now. The time for talking, for second-guessing, had long passed. As Varrock's forces arrived at the outer defenses of the city, the battle raged in full force. Finn fought alongside the palace's defenders, his heart pounding as blaster fire lit up the sky. The city was alive with the sounds of war, and for the first time, Finn felt the full weight of the responsibility he had taken on. He wasn't just fighting for the coalition anymore. He was fighting for Leora, for Solaris. 9, for everything that had been set in motion the moment his fingers had touched her wrist. Leora stood nearby, directing her forces with precision, her every movement calculated, her power emanating from her in waves. Finn could feel it, the strange connection that had been forged between them. He didn't fully understand it, but he didn't need to. All that mattered now was that they were fighting together, standing side by side against an enemy that would stop at nothing to destroy them. The battle escalated, the palace defenses buckling under the weight of Varrock's attack. Finn found himself in the thick of the fighting, his weapon firing in a blur as he moved with the soldiers, protecting the Empress and the kingdom. The sounds of explosions and gunfire were deafening, and the sky above was filled with the chaos of war. But even as the battle raged on, Finn never took his eyes off Leora. He could feel her power growing, building with every passing moment. It was a force unlike anything he had ever encountered. The air itself seemed to hum with energy as she manipulated time, slowing the enemy's movements, giving her forces the upper hand. But it wasn't enough. Varrock's forces were too strong, and they were closing in on the palace. It was then that the realization hit Finn like a bolt of lightning. He wasn't just a soldier, and Leora wasn't just an empress. Together, they were the key. The prophecy had made it clear he was the balance, the counterforce, to her power. And now, in the heart of the battle, they had to make the choice that would determine the future of Solaris 9. As the enemy closed in, Finn ran to Leora's side. The moment was upon them. There was no more time for hesitation. The kingdom was on the brink of collapse, and only together could they stop it. Leora looked at him, her silver eyes filled with determination. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with the weight of the question.
Finn nodded, his heart steady in his chest.
"I'm ready." Leora reached out, her hand brushing against his.
The moment their fingers touched, the air around them seemed to explode with energy. Finn could feel it, an overwhelming force, a wave of power that surged through him. Time itself seemed to bend, and in that moment, they were no longer just two individuals. They were one, connected by the power of the prophecy, the bond that had been set into motion from the very beginning. Together, they unleashed the full force of their combined power. The battle slowed, the world around them freezing in place as Leora's abilities flowed through Finn. He felt the energy course through his body, felt the connection between them grow stronger. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Time itself bent to their will, and in that moment, they were unstoppable. With a single, unified push, they sent Varrock's forces scattering. The battle was won. Solaris 9 had been saved. But as the dust settled, Finn and Leora stood together, their hands still touching, knowing that this victory was just the beginning of a new chapter. The palace was silent, save for the distant sounds of the soldiers celebrating their hard-fought victory. Finn and Leora stood in the center of the war room, the weight of what they had just done settling over them. They had faced the greatest threat to the kingdom, and together, they had won. But the bond between them, stronger than anything either of them could have imagined, was just beginning. As they looked at each other, the future seemed uncertain, but for the first time, Finn felt at peace. He had made his choice, and now, together with Leora, he would face whatever came next.